My son wants to live with me, Your Honor. Melissa's voice carried perfectly through the hushed courtroom, her practiced sincerity making me grip the wooden bench until my knuckles turned white. 8 months since we buried my son David, and here we were, fighting over the only piece of him left in this world, his 12-year-old son, Ethan. I watched my grandson's shoulders tense under his navy blue blazer. Too formal for a boy his age, but Melissa had insisted he look presentable for court. The same Melissa who couldn't be bothered to wash his school uniforms or notice when he went 3 days wearing the same t-shirt at home. Judge Carlton, a man whose silver hair and lined face spoke of decades witnessing human conflict, adjusted his glasses and addressed Ethan directly. Is that true, young man? Do you want to live with your mother? The courtroom fell silent. My attorney squeezed my hand in reassurance, but we both knew the reality. Courts favor biological parents. Despite all our documentation of Melissa's negligence, despite Ethan spending more nights at my house than his own over the past months, despite everything, she remained his mother. Ethan stood slowly. At 12, he was at that awkward age, no longer a little boy, but not yet a teenager, gangly limbs and a voice that occasionally cracked. David's eyes looked back at me from his son's face, sending a fresh wave of grief through my chest. Your Honor, he began, his voice steadier than I expected. May I show you something first? From his pocket, he pulled out his phone, the one I'd given him for his birthday last month after Melissa forgot their mobile upgrade appointment for the 3rd time. I have a recording from last night, Ethan continued. I think it will help you understand. Melissa's perfectly composed expression slipped. Objection, Your Honor. Whatever my son recorded was done without my knowledge or consent. That's illegal and— Ms. Reynolds, Judge Carlton interrupted firmly. In family court, I have considerable latitude to hear evidence, especially from the minor whose custody is being determined. I'll decide its admissibility after hearing it. He nodded toward Ethan. You may proceed, young man. My grandson pressed play, and Melissa's voice filled the courtroom. Not the carefully modulated tones she'd used before the judge, but sharp, impatient words. Stop packing that bag, Ethan. You're not going to your grandmother's tonight. But Mom, you said I could when you and Brandon go to the concert. Plans change. Brandon thinks it looks bad if you're always at her house. Once this custody nonsense is settled, you won't be spending so much time with her anyway. But no buts. God, you're just like your father, always making everything so difficult. Look, once we get this court thing handled, we're moving to Phoenix with Brandon. His job offer includes a house with a pool. You'll love it. What about Grandma Lauren? And my friends? And Dad's? Your grandmother has interfered enough. You're my son, not hers. End of discussion. The recording continued with the sound of a door slamming, followed by Ethan's quiet crying. Judge Carlton's expression remained impassive, but his eyes had hardened. He looked directly at Melissa, whose face had drained of color. Ms. Reynolds, would you like to explain this recording? Melissa recovered quickly, tears springing to her eyes. Your Honor, I've been under tremendous stress since losing David. Sometimes I say things I don't mean. Ethan knows I love him more than anything. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. 8 months of watching her neglect Ethan while she rebuilt her social life. 8 months of him showing up at my doorstep hungry, or with homework unsigned. 8 months of her canceling her parenting time at the last minute. And now this performance. Judge Carlton wasn't finished. Ethan, is there more to this recording? My grandson nodded, his fingers trembling slightly as he found another timestamp. This is from later last night, when Mom thought I was asleep. He pressed play again. This time, we heard Melissa speaking to Brandon, her boyfriend of 5 months. The lawyer says once I have full custody, we'll have more flexibility with Ethan's trust fund for educational and living expenses. That old witch won't be able to block anything. Brandon's voice, smooth and calculating. And the house? David's life insurance? The house is already mine, but the insurance mostly went into Ethan's trust. That's what I'm telling you. Once we have full custody and move to Arizona, we can petition to be the sole trustees. Lauren won't have any say. I watched the judge's expression darken as the recording continued, detailing Melissa and Brandon's plans for the money my son had left to secure his child's future. Money that had become, it seemed, Melissa's primary interest in maintaining custody. When the recording ended, Judge Carlton removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. The courtroom remained silent. the truth hanging heavy in the air. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," he finally announced. "When we return, I'll hear final arguments before making my decision." As we filed out of the courtroom, my attorney leaned close. "That recording changes everything, Lauren. Judges hate when financial motives drive custody battles." I nodded, but couldn't speak past the knot in my throat. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. My grandson had been forced to expose his own mother's callousness to protect himself. In the hallway, Ethan slipped his hand into mine, something he hadn't done in public since he was 9, considering it too babyish. The simple gesture nearly broke me. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he whispered. "I didn't want to embarrass Mom, but you have nothing to apologize for," I assured him. "Nothing at all." Over his shoulder, I caught Melissa's gaze, cold and calculating beneath her mask of maternal concern. The woman my son had once loved enough to marry, to start a family with, was a stranger to me now. As we waited to return to the courtroom, I thought about David, my brilliant, kind-hearted son who had updated his will just weeks before the accident that took his life, as if some part of him had sensed the need to protect his child's future. I thought about my daughter Emma, who had flown in from Seattle to support us despite her demanding surgical residency. And I thought about Ethan, forced to grow up too quickly in the past 8 months. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. I would not let David down. I would protect his son, no matter what it took. The bailiff called us back into the courtroom, and I straightened my shoulders, ready to face whatever came next, for Ethan, for David, for the family that remained. Judge Carlton's decision still echoed in my ears as I unlocked the door to my home. Now officially Ethan's home as well, at least temporarily. Temporary full custody is granted to the maternal grandmother, Lauren Carter, pending a full home study and psychological evaluation of all parties. The court finds sufficient evidence of potential financial exploitation to warrant immediate intervention. Melissa's face when the ruling was announced would haunt me for years, shock dissolving into calculated fury as she realized her plans had unraveled in the space of a 30-minute recording. Her parting words in the courthouse parking lot still hung in the air between Ethan and me. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Can I put my stuff in the blue room?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence as we entered the house. The blue room had been his designated space in my home since he was a toddler, gradually evolving from nursery to child's bedroom to the current preteen haven with its space posters and bookshelf full of science fiction. "Of course," I replied, trying to sound normal, as if this were just another weekend visit and not the beginning of a new chapter neither of us had anticipated. "Are you hungry? I could make grilled cheese." He nodded, dropping his backpack by the stairs. "Mom there wasn't much breakfast this morning. She was busy getting ready for court." The casual mention of Melissa's neglect, so commonplace that Ethan mentioned it without emphasis, tightened something in my chest. How long had this been his normal? How much had I missed while trying to respect Melissa's role as his mother? As I prepared lunch, my phone rang. Emma calling from Seattle, anxious for news. "The judge gave me temporary custody," I told my daughter, keeping my voice low as Ethan arranged his belongings upstairs. "But it's just the beginning. Melissa's already threatening to fight." "Of course she is," Emma replied, her voice tight with the same frustration I felt. Money has always been her primary motivation. Remember how quickly she tried to sell the house after Dad died? I did remember. Just 6 weeks after my husband John's funeral 3 years ago, Melissa had suggested that downsizing might be healing for everyone. David had shut down the idea immediately, recognizing it as a transparent attempt to access equity rather than emotional closure. "The good news," Emma continued, "is that I've arranged to take a 2-week leave from the hospital. I'll fly in tomorrow to help with everything." Relief washed over me. Emma, my practical, determined daughter, who had followed her father into medicine, would be a crucial ally in the days ahead. At 34, she balanced her father's analytical mind with my own stubborn perseverance, qualities we would need in abundance. "Mom?" Ethan's voice from the doorway pulled me back to the present. "Is that Aunt Emma?" I handed him the phone, watching as his face brightened during their conversation. Emma had always been his champion, from teaching him to ride a bike when David was traveling for work to defending him fiercely when Melissa suggested his struggles in math were due to not trying hard enough, rather than the dyslexia that was later diagnosed. As they chatted, my phone pinged with a text message from my attorney. Melissa's lawyer requesting emergency hearing to overturn temporary custody order, claiming recording was illegal and grandson was coerced. Court date next Tuesday. Don't worry, we're prepared. The brief moment of peace shattered. Of course Melissa wouldn't accept the judge's decision. Of course she would claim manipulation. The trust fund David had established for Ethan was substantial, nearly $2 million from his life insurance and company shares, with me and Emma as co-trustees until Ethan turned 25. In their recording, Melissa and Brandon had made it clear they believed gaining custody was the first step to accessing those funds. Grandma? Ethan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stood holding my phone, his expression suddenly years older than his 12 years. Mom's calling. Should I answer? The court order included reasonable phone contact between Ethan and Melissa. I nodded, though every instinct wanted to shield him from whatever manipulative tactics she might employ. Hi, Mom, he answered, his voice carefully neutral. Even from across the kitchen, I could hear Melissa's agitated tone, though not her specific words. Ethan's face remained impressively stoic as he listened. No, I wasn't coached, because it was the truth. No, Grandma didn't tell me to record anything. I did it because... He fell silent, listening again. Then, with a firmness that startled me, I don't want to move to Phoenix with Brandon. I want to stay here, in Dad's house, in my school, with Grandma and my friends. Another pause. I know you're my mom. That doesn't mean... He stopped again, his expression clouding. That's not fair. Dad wouldn't want... Whatever Melissa said next made him flinch. He handed me the phone without another word and walked out of the kitchen, his shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. Melissa, I began, keeping my voice level despite the anger boiling beneath the surface. You've turned my son against me, she hissed, dispensing with any pretense of civility. Congratulations, Lauren. I hope you're satisfied. Ethan made his own recording and his own decision to show the judge, I replied evenly. If you're unhappy with how you appear in that recording, perhaps you should reflect on your own behavior, not blame a 12-year-old boy or his grandmother. This is temporary, she spat. I'm his mother. No judge is going to permanently give custody to a 67-year-old woman over a biological parent. The jab at my age was deliberate and cutting. I was active and healthy, but the 15-year age gap between my children meant I was indeed older than most grandparents of 12-year-olds. It was a card Melissa would undoubtedly play in court. I'm not trying to replace you, I said, maintaining my composure with effort. I'm trying to provide stability for Ethan while you sort through your priorities. My priority is my son. Is it? Because based on that recording, your priority seems to be his trust fund. The silence that followed was brittle with rage. When Melissa spoke again, her voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Lauren. None at all. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, a chill settling between my shoulder blades. In the 8 months since David's death, I had watched Melissa transform from grieving widow to negligent mother to calculated opponent. What would she become next, now that her financial plans had been temporarily thwarted? From upstairs came the faint sound of Ethan's guitar, halting chords of the song David had been teaching him before the accident. The familiar melody steadied me, a reminder of what was at stake. My phone pinged with another text, this time from Emma. Flight lands 10:15 a.m. tomorrow. Don't worry, Mom. We've got this. I took a deep breath and began assembling grilled cheese sandwiches, choosing normalcy as my shield against the storm I knew was gathering. Ethan needed stability now, more than ever, and I was determined to provide it, no matter what Melissa might do next. As I carried lunch upstairs to Ethan's room, I silently thanked David for his foresight in creating that trust with Emma and me as trustees. Without it, Melissa might have already depleted the funds meant to secure his son's future. With it, we at least had financial leverage in the battle ahead. What we didn't have was any idea how far Melissa would go to regain control, not just of Ethan, but of the money she believed should be hers. Emma's arrival the following morning brought a surge of energy into the house. My daughter had always been a force of nature, efficient, direct, and fiercely protective of those she loved. As a pediatric surgeon, she channeled these qualities into saving children's lives. Now she would use them to help save her nephew. I've already spoken with 3 child psychologists who specialize in custody evaluations, she announced, before her suitcase had even hit the guest room floor. And I've compiled Ethan's medical records showing the pattern of missed appointments and delayed vaccinations over the past 8 months. I smiled, despite my exhaustion. Hello to you too, sweetheart. Coffee? Emma paused, then laughed ruefully. Sorry, Mom. Doctor mode. She embraced me tightly. How are you holding up? Really? I'm managing, I replied, leading her to the kitchen. It's Ethan I'm worried about. He's trying so hard to be brave, but this is taking a toll. Ethan was at school, his first day back since the custody hearing. I'd given him the option to stay home, but he'd insisted on maintaining his routine. Dad always said education comes first, he'd reminded me, in a perfect imitation of David's serious tone that nearly broke my heart. Where is Melissa staying? Emma asked, accepting the coffee mug I offered. At the house, as far as I know. The judge didn't order her to leave the family home, just granted me temporary custody of Ethan. I sighed, sinking into a kitchen chair. That's another complication. Legally, the house belongs to Melissa as David's widow, though the mortgage is being paid from Ethan's trust as David specified in his will. Emma's expression hardened. So she's living in a house essentially paid for by Ethan's inheritance while plotting how to get control of the rest of his money? Before I could respond, my phone rang. My attorney, Patricia Winters. Lauren, we have a situation, she began without preamble. Melissa's filed an emergency motion claiming elder exploitation. What? The accusation was so absurd I nearly laughed. She's alleging you're using Ethan to access his trust fund for your own benefit. She's demanding a full financial audit of all expenditures since David's death. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so infuriating. That's ridiculous. Emma and I haven't used a penny of that money except for the mortgage payments and Ethan's school tuition, exactly as David's will stipulated. I know that, and the financial records will prove it. But it's a clever tactical move. It shifts focus from her recorded plans to exploit the trust to unfounded allegations against you. Emma, reading my expression, reached for my free hand. There's more, Patricia continued. She's also requesting supervised visitation for you, claiming you're emotionally manipulating Ethan and turning him against his mother. That's absurd, I protested. I've never spoken against Melissa to Ethan, even when... I believe you, Patricia interrupted gently. But the court will need to investigate all allegations. Expect a guardian ad litem to be appointed for Ethan and home visits from family services. After ending the call, I relayed everything to Emma, whose medical training couldn't fully mask her fury. This is classic Darvo, she declared. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Melissa's taking exactly what she's guilty of and projecting it onto you. The financial audit doesn't worry me, I said. We've been meticulous about the trust, but the allegation that I'm manipulating Ethan... I shook my head, the unfairness cutting deep. I've bent over backward trying not to criticize Melissa in front of him, even when she's canceled plans or left him waiting for hours. Emma's expression softened. Mom, anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and Ethan will see the truth. You've been his rock while Melissa's been... She trailed off, diplomatic even in anger. We need to prepare Ethan, I said, glancing at the clock. School dismissed in 2 hours. He needs to understand that things might get more complicated before they get better. Let me pick him up today, Emma suggested. I'll take him for ice cream, ease him into the conversation. Coming from his cool aunt might make it less scary. I nodded gratefully. Emma had always had a special bond with Ethan, built on science experiments, secret handshakes, and an understanding that transcended the aunt-nephew relationship. In many ways, she'd become a maternal figure when Melissa's attention wandered, especially after David's death. While Emma went to collect Ethan, I called my neighbor and closest friend, Diane, who had been my confidant throughout this ordeal. She's claiming what? Diane exclaimed when I explained Melissa's latest allegations. Lauren, that's outrageous. You've been practically keeping that boy alive while she parades around town with her new boyfriend. The court doesn't know that, I pointed out. They only know what's presented as evidence. Then we need more evidence, Diane said firmly. I've seen Ethan coming to your house hungry because there's no food at home. I've watched Melissa drop him off and disappear for days. The entire neighborhood has witnessed her negligence. Would you be willing to make a statement? I asked hesitantly. Involving others meant expanding the circle of conflict, something I'd been reluctant to do. I'll do better than that, Diane replied. I'll organize statements from the whole neighborhood. The Patels next door, the Rodriguezes across the street. We've all seen what's been happening. It's time we spoke up. By the time Emma returned with Ethan, his favorite mint chocolate chip ice cream having softened the blow of the latest developments, I had emails from 5 neighbors offering detailed accounts of Melissa's neglect and my consistent presence in Ethan's life. "Grandma, Aunt Emma says Mom's telling lies about you," Ethan said as he entered the kitchen, his expression troubled but determined. "I can tell the judge what really happened. I have more recordings." I exchanged glances with Emma, concerned about putting Ethan in the middle of an increasingly hostile battle. "What kind of recordings?" Emma asked carefully. "Times when Mom forgot to pick me up from school, when she left me alone all weekend with just $20 for food, when she and Brandon were talking about selling Dad's watch collection that was supposed to be mine when I'm older." He pulled out his phone. "I've been keeping track of everything since you showed me how to use the voice memo app, Aunt Emma." My heart ached for this child, who had felt the need to document his own neglect, even as I felt a surge of pride at his resourcefulness. "Ethan," I said gently, "we don't want you to feel responsible for the legal aspects of this situation. That's for the adults to handle." He looked at me with eyes too wise for his 12 years. "Dad always said we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. I'm not letting Mom hurt you because of me, Grandma. I'm not." In that moment, I saw David so clearly in his son that tears sprang to my eyes. Emma, noticing, smoothly suggested Ethan show her his latest science project upstairs, giving me a moment to compose myself. Alone in the kitchen, I looked at the growing collection of evidence on my laptop, financial records, neighbor statements, Ethan's recordings, and wondered how we had arrived at this point, how the woman my son had loved enough to marry had become an adversary willing to destroy anyone in her path to financial gain. And I wondered, with a chill I couldn't shake, just how far Melissa would go when she realized the neighborhood was rallying against her, that Ethan had been documenting her neglect, and that her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. The answer, I feared, would prove far worse than anything we had prepared for. The first sign of Melissa's retaliation came at 3 a.m., a shattering crash that jolted me from sleep. I fumbled for my phone, heart pounding as I dialed 911. "Someone's broken my front window," I told the dispatcher, keeping my voice low. "My grandson is in the house. Please hurry." I crept to Ethan's room, relieved to find him still asleep, then cautiously approached the stairs. Glass glittered across my living room floor, surrounding a brick with a note attached, "Drop the case or worse, next time." When the police arrived minutes later, they documented everything methodically: the brick, the note, the shattered window, but their expressions remained professionally neutral when I suggested Melissa might be responsible. "Mrs. Carter will investigate all possibilities," the officer said carefully, "but without witnesses or camera footage, it's difficult to establish who did this." By morning, Emma had installed a security system with cameras covering every approach to the house, while Ethan watched wide-eyed, the reality of the situation finally penetrating his stoic facade. "Mom wouldn't really do that, would she?" he asked as we swept up the last glass shards. "Throw a brick through your window?" I chose my words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. People sometimes make poor choices when they're desperate." "It was Brandon," Emma stated flatly once Ethan was out of earshot. "Melissa's too calculating to do something this crude herself, but he's exactly the type to think intimidation will work." Patricia, when informed, immediately filed for a restraining order and submitted the incident as evidence of escalation. "This actually helps our case," she explained. "It demonstrates the lengths they'll go to maintain control." 2 days later, the second attack came. Not physical, but perhaps more damaging. Melissa launched a social media campaign portraying herself as a grieving widow being separated from her son by a controlling mother-in-law. The posts included carefully edited photos of happier times with David and Ethan, interspersed with tearful videos about grandparent alienation and elder financial abuse. The comments section filled with outrage from strangers who knew nothing of the truth. Worse, several distant relatives and casual acquaintances began sharing the posts, adding their own shocked reactions. "She's creating an alternate reality," Emma fumed, scrolling through the growing digital narrative. "One where she's the devoted mother and you're the villain." I felt sick watching the fabrication spread. "Should we respond? Try to correct the record?" Patricia advised against it. "The court won't be influenced by social media drama. Engaging only validates her platform and makes you look defensive. Document everything, but don't respond publicly." The restraint was difficult, especially when Ethan discovered the posts while researching a school project. "She's lying about you," he said, voice shaking with anger. "And about me. She's saying I was manipulated, that I didn't really want to live with you." I held him close, feeling his thin shoulders trembling. "The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, Ethan. The judge will see through this." But even as I reassured him, I worried. Public perception could influence even the most impartial legal proceedings, and Melissa was crafting a compelling, fictional narrative. The following day brought the third escalation, a visit from Child Protective Services, prompted by an anonymous report claiming I was medically neglecting Ethan. The social worker, Ms. Chai Torres, was professional but thorough, inspecting the house, checking the refrigerator for appropriate food, and interviewing Ethan privately. I sat in the kitchen with Emma, both of us tense despite having nothing to hide. "This is absurd," Emma whispered furiously. "You've taken him to every doctor's appointment since David died. He's healthier and more stable now than he's been in months." When Ms. Torres finally concluded her inspection, her expression had softened noticeably. "Mrs. Carter, I want to be transparent with you. We receive many reports during custody disputes, and we're required to investigate all of them. What I've seen today doesn't raise any concerns about Ethan's welfare in your care." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. I understand you're doing your job. However," she continued carefully, "I should inform you that the reporter made multiple allegations. This was just the initial visit. There may be follow-up investigations." After she left, Emma called Patricia immediately. "Melissa's weaponizing the system against us. First social media, now CPS. What's next?" "Unfortunately, this is textbook high-conflict custody behavior," Patricia replied. "The good news is that judges recognize these patterns. Each false report actually strengthens our position for the final custody determination. But the constant attacks were taking a toll. I found myself jumping at unexpected noises, checking the security cameras obsessively, scrutinizing every aspect of Ethan's care for potential vulnerabilities Melissa might exploit. Ethan, meanwhile, was showing signs of increasing anxiety, trouble sleeping, decreased appetite, startling easily. When Emma suggested he speak with a therapist, he initially resisted. "I'm not crazy," he insisted. "I'm just worried about what Mom might do next." "Therapy isn't for crazy people," Emma explained gently. "It's for anyone navigating difficult situations, like surgeons who need physical therapy after long surgeries strain their backs." The medical comparison resonated with him, and he reluctantly agreed. Dr. Kavita Shah, a child psychologist specializing in family trauma, quickly established rapport with Ethan. After their third session, she requested to speak with me privately. "Ethan is remarkably resilient," she began, "but he's carrying an unhealthy burden of responsibility. He believes he needs to protect you from his mother." My heart sank. "That's exactly what I've tried to prevent." "Children are perceptive," Dr. Shah said kindly. "He sees the strain you're under, regardless of how well you think you're hiding it. But there's something else concerning me." She hesitated. "Ethan mentioned his mother has been sending him private messages suggesting that if he tells the truth and comes home, she'll drop all legal actions against you." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty, using Ethan's love for me as leverage against him. "He's refused her offers," Dr. Shah continued, "but each refusal increases his anxiety. He's essentially being asked to choose between his own well-being and yours." I closed my eyes briefly, gathering strength. "What can we do?" "First, consider blocking direct communication between Ethan and his mother except through monitored channels. Second, Ethan needs reassurance that the adults will solve these problems, not him. And third," she met my gaze directly, "you need support too, Mrs. Carter. This situation would challenge anyone, let alone someone processing their own grief for their son." That evening, after discussing Dr. Shah's recommendations with Emma and Patricia, we filed an emergency motion requesting that all communication between Melissa and Ethan be conducted through a court-approved co-parenting app that would document all exchanges. As I prepared dinner, trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine, Emma received a text that made her expression darken. "What now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "It's from Dad's old colleague at the hospital," she replied slowly. "Melissa was just hired as an administrative assistant in the billing department, the same department that handles all employee medical records." The implications hit me immediately. Emma's position as co-trustee of Ethan's trust made her as much a target as me. If Melissa gained access to her medical information, "I'll call HR in the morning," Emma said, already composing an email to her supervisor, and the hospital legal department. That night, as Ethan finally slept peacefully with the help of Dr. Shaw's recommended bedtime routine, Emma and I sat on the porch, the security lights casting long shadows across the yard. "She's not going to stop," Emma said quietly. "Every time we block one avenue, she finds another." I watched the shadows, remembering how David had played in this very yard as a child, how he'd later taught Ethan to ride a bike on this same stretch of concrete. "No, she's not going to stop," I agreed. "Which means we need to find a way to end this conclusively." "How?" Emma asked. "We're already doing everything legally possible." I considered the question, thinking about all I'd learned about Melissa in the 8 months since David's death, her patterns, her motivations, her weaknesses. "She wants Ethan's money," I said slowly. "Everything else is secondary. What if we used that against her?" Emma turned to me, curiosity replacing exhaustion in her expression. "What are you thinking, Mom?" "Something David would probably call crazy," I admitted. "But maybe crazy is exactly what we need right now." "You want to do what?" Patricia stared at me across her office desk, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "Offer Melissa money to walk away," I repeated calmly. "Not from Ethan's trust. That remains untouchable. Personal funds." Emma, seated beside me, nodded. "Mom's been thinking this through all night. Melissa's actions are financially motivated. If we address that motivation directly, we might be able to resolve this without dragging Ethan through months of escalating conflict." Patricia set down her cup carefully. "Lauren, I understand the impulse, but paying off someone making false allegations could be interpreted as an admission of guilt. Why would an innocent person pay to make a problem go away? Because an innocent person might prioritize a child's well-being over being right," I countered. "Every day this continues damages Ethan further. The brick through the window, the CPS visit, the social media campaign, it's death by 1,000 cuts, and Ethan feels every one of them. Not to mention," Emma added, "Melissa's new position at the hospital gives her potential access to sensitive information. We've alerted HR, but systems have vulnerabilities. The longer this drags on, the more creative she'll become." Patricia leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin, a posture I recognized from our previous consultations. She was considering all angles, which was precisely why I'd hired her. "Let's assume the court grants you permanent custody," she said finally. "Melissa would still have visitation rights. She'd remain in Ethan's life, with ongoing opportunities to manipulate and undermine. Money might address her immediate motivation, but not her long-term presence." "That's the second part of the proposal," I explained. "We don't just offer money. We offer a clean break, a significant sum in exchange for voluntary termination of parental rights." The suggestion hung in the air, radical even to my own ears. Termination of parental rights was the nuclear option in family law, typically reserved for cases of severe abuse or abandonment. "Voluntary termination is extremely rare," Patricia said slowly. "Most courts won't even consider it without another parent ready to adopt. Which is why it would need to be Melissa's idea, not ours," Emma interjected. "We don't suggest termination. We simply make a financial offer for her to resolve the situation completely and see what she proposes." Patricia's expression remained skeptical. Even if she suggested it herself, a judge would scrutinize any agreement heavily. There would need to be a compelling reason beyond financial consideration. "What about relocation?" I suggested. Melissa mentioned moving to Phoenix with Brandon. If she presented termination as a compassionate choice, allowing Ethan stability rather than cross-country visitation, it might be more palatable to the court. "And if she brought up the idea first," Emma added, "after we've established a pattern of her prioritizing money over Ethan's welfare, it would reinforce our narrative rather than undermine it." Patricia tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. "It's unorthodox," she admitted, "but given the circumstances, how would you envision approaching her?" "Not directly," I said firmly. "That's too risky. We need a neutral third party, someone who could float the concept without it being traced back to us." "I might have an idea," Emma said slowly. "Brandon's ex-wife is a scrub nurse at my hospital. From what I've heard, they had an extremely contentious divorce, largely due to financial issues. She might be motivated to disrupt his latest meal ticket. Patricia raised an eyebrow. You want to recruit the boyfriend's ex-wife as an intermediary? That's creative problem-solving, Emma finished with a hint of her father's wry humor. Something surgeons excel at. It's risky, I acknowledged, but every option before us carries risk. This at least gives us some control over the narrative. After another hour of discussion, refining the approach and anticipating potential pitfalls, Patricia reluctantly agreed to draft a neutral settlement offer, one that mentioned financial compensation without specifying the purpose, carefully worded to avoid any suggestion of impropriety. Remember, she cautioned as we prepared to leave, this needs to appear as though you're merely open to resolving the conflict efficiently. Nothing that could be construed as buying custody or encouraging termination of rights. Those suggestions need to come from Melissa, documented without our fingerprints anywhere near them. As Emma and I drove home, the weight of what we were considering settled heavily on my shoulders. Was I truly prepared to essentially purchase my grandson's freedom from his mother? What would David think of such a strategy? You're second-guessing, Emma observed, reading my expression with the same perceptiveness she'd inherited from her father. Wouldn't you? I sighed. It feels mercenary. It's pragmatic, Emma corrected. Dad was an idealist in many ways, but as a doctor, he understood triage. Sometimes you have to address the most immediate threat to preserve what matters most. And if it works? I asked. If Melissa actually agrees to termination, what do we tell Ethan? That his mother sold her rights for a payout? Emma's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We tell him the truth, in age-appropriate ways. That his mother made choices that prioritized her happiness over his well-being. That sometimes adults fail their children, not because the children are unlovable, but because the adults are damaged. That's a heavy burden for a 12-year-old. It's already his burden, Mom. He's living it every day. The only question is whether we help him understand it or leave him to interpret it alone. When we arrived home, Diane was on the porch with Ethan, supervising as he repainted the railing, a project he'd requested, explaining solemnly that constructive activities help process difficult emotions, according to Dr. Shaw. Perfect timing, Diane called as we approached. We're just finishing the first coat. Ethan has quite the eye for detail. My grandson looked up, paint smudged across one cheek, the first genuine smile I'd seen in days lighting his face. Grandma, do you like the blue? It's almost the same color Dad and I painted my treehouse. The simple joy in his expression, the connection to David he was working to maintain, strengthened my resolve. This child deserved stability, security, and peace, not to be a pawn in his mother's financial schemes. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Emma made the call to Brandon's ex-wife, carefully framing the conversation as one healthcare professional to another, concerned about a child caught in an increasingly volatile situation. 3 days later, as Ethan and I worked in the garden, my phone rang with an unknown number. Lauren, Melissa's voice was cool, controlled. I think it's time we discussed a permanent resolution to our situation, one that benefits everyone involved. I met Emma's gaze across the yard, where she'd been pretending to read while actually monitoring the security cameras. I'm listening, I replied, matching Melissa's businesslike tone while my heart raced with cautious hope. The first piece of our strategy had worked. Now came the delicate part, allowing Melissa to believe the most reprehensible solution was her own brilliant idea. Let's be practical about this situation, Melissa continued, her voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone who believes they're in control. This legal battle is costly for everyone involved, emotionally and financially. There's a simpler solution. I remained silent, letting her fill the space, a technique I'd learned during my years teaching high school English. The most revealing statements often emerge when people are uncomfortable with silence. I'm considering relocating to Phoenix with Brandon, she continued after a moment. His job offer includes significant advancement opportunities, and frankly, there are too many painful memories here since David's death. I understand, I replied neutrally, giving nothing away. Ethan has mentioned you were discussing a move. A brief hesitation. Yes, well, that's part of what I wanted to discuss. Long-distance co-parenting would be challenging, especially with our current dynamics. I could almost hear her calculating her next words, weighing how direct to be about her true intentions. It occurs to me, she finally said, that there might be an arrangement that would benefit everyone. Ethan is clearly attached to you and Emma. He's established at his school, has his friends here. Uprooting him might not be in his best interest. The sudden concern for Ethan's welfare would have been touching if it weren't so transparently strategic. I remained silent, waiting. I'm wondering if we might consider a more permanent arrangement, Melissa continued, her voice dropping slightly as if sharing a confidence. One where Ethan remains with you, and I move forward with my life in Phoenix. What exactly are you proposing, Melissa? I asked, careful to keep any hint of eagerness from my voice. A clean break, she replied promptly. I've been researching options. Did you know that voluntary termination of parental rights is possible under certain circumstances, particularly when another family member is prepared to assume full responsibility? And there it was, the suggestion we'd hoped she would make, now presented as her own compassionate idea. Patricia had warned us to let Melissa articulate the proposition clearly, to create an unambiguous record of her initiative. That's a significant step, I observed, deliberately neutral. Termination of rights is permanent. Exactly, she agreed, a new eagerness entering her voice. No more court battles, no more conflict. Ethan stays where he's comfortable, and I can move forward without constant legal entanglements. I see, I said carefully. And what would this arrangement entail, practically speaking? The brief pause told me we'd reached the crux of the conversation, the part Melissa had been leading toward all along. Well, there would be financial considerations, she said delicately. After all, I'd be relinquishing my claim to make decisions about Ethan's future, including his inheritance management. You're suggesting compensation, I clarified, ensuring the terms were explicit. I prefer to think of it as recognition of the sacrifice involved, Melissa countered smoothly. I am his mother, after all. Legally walking away from that relationship deserves acknowledgement. I took a steadying breath, feeling Emma's attentive gaze from across the yard. What kind of acknowledgement did you have in mind? $250,000, Melissa stated without hesitation, as if she'd calculated the precise value of her maternal rights. A one-time payment, after which I would voluntarily terminate all parental rights and legal claims regarding Ethan. The amount was actually less than we'd anticipated, revealing either Melissa's underestimation of her negotiating position or the depth of her eagerness to cash out and leave. That's a significant request, I replied, stalling while I processed her proposal. I would need to consult with my attorney about the legality of such an arrangement. Of course, Melissa agreed readily. I've already spoken with mine. It's unconventional, but not unprecedented. The key is presenting it to the court as a mutual recognition that Ethan's stability is best served by remaining with you, while I pursue opportunities that would otherwise require disrupting his life. Her rehearsed explanation sounded reasonable, even altruistic, a mother sacrificing her rights for her child's well-being, with financial compensation merely an incidental factor. The narrative was cleverly constructed to disguise the reality. She was selling her son for $250,000. I'll need to think about this, I said, unwilling to appear too eager despite the surge of hope her proposal had triggered, and discuss it with Emma, as she's co-trustee of Ethan's inheritance. I understand, Melissa replied, an edge of impatience now audible beneath her composed exterior. But I should mention that Brandon's position has a definite timeline. We would need to relocate within the next month to secure the opportunity, so a prompt decision would be appreciated. The artificial deadline was transparent, a classic high-pressure sales tactic, but I didn't challenge it. Let her believe her strategy was working. I'll get back to you within a few days, I promised. This isn't a decision to be made lightly. After ending the call, I walked over to Emma, who had abandoned any pretense of reading. $250,000, I reported quietly, mindful of Ethan working nearby. For complete termination of rights. Emma's eyebrows rose. That's all? I was expecting at least double that. She must be desperate to leave, I observed, or Brandon's opportunity is time-sensitive for reasons she hasn't shared. So we counter-offer? Emma asked. I shook my head slowly. No, we accept her terms, but with conditions. The money is placed in escrow, released only after termination is finalized, and she's physically relocated to Phoenix. And we include a non-disclosure agreement. She never discusses this arrangement publicly or with Ethan. She'll want some of the money up front, Emma predicted. A small percentage, perhaps, but the majority remains contingent on completed termination. Otherwise, what prevents her from taking an initial payment and then dragging out the process? We spent the evening carefully planning our response, consulting with Patricia via secure video call to ensure every aspect of our counterproposal was legally sound and ethically defensible. The court will scrutinize this arrangement heavily, Patricia reminded us. The judge needs to believe termination truly serves Ethan's best interests, not just the adult's convenience. Which is why Melissa's relocation is crucial to the narrative, Emma pointed out. She's not abandoning her child. She's recognizing that forcing him to choose between his established support system and moving cross-country with her would be harmful. And the financial component? Patricia pressed. Is a practical recognition that she's relinquishing future decision-making regarding Ethan's inheritance? I supplied. Not payment for termination itself. The distinction was subtle but significant. A careful threading of legal and ethical needles that might allow this unconventional solution to pass judicial review. Later that night, after finalizing our response to Melissa's proposition, I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed watching him sleep, his features relaxed in slumber, free from the anxiety that had marked his waking hours since this ordeal began. The worn, stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm, a gift from David on his 5th birthday, was a poignant reminder of all he had already lost. Was I doing the right thing? Facilitating the severance of his relationship with his mother, however flawed she might be? Or was I protecting him from years of manipulation and disappointment at the hands of someone who valued money above his well-being? There were no perfect answers, only difficult choices made with imperfect information. But looking at my grandson's peaceful face, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I would walk through fire to protect him from further harm. If that meant paying Melissa to remove herself permanently from his life, so be it. Some might call it distasteful or mercenary. I called it the price of peace, an investment in Ethan's future security that David would have made without hesitation. Tomorrow, we would set the wheels in motion. For better or worse, we were committed to our course. The Starbucks on Main Street provided the neutral territory Patricia had recommended for our meeting with Melissa and her attorney. Public enough to discourage outbursts, private enough for discreet conversation at a corner table. Emma had insisted on accompanying me despite my protests that she should be conserving her limited leave time. I'm a trustee too, she had reminded me firmly. Besides, Melissa is less likely to try manipulation tactics with both of us present. We arrived 15 minutes early. A strategic decision to claim the optimal seating position. Patricia joined us shortly after, meticulously organized as always with color-coded folders containing our counter-proposal and supporting documentation. Remember, she cautioned in a low voice, let me lead the legal discussion. If Melissa tries to engage you emotionally, redirect to the practical aspects of the agreement. Melissa arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a sleek man in his 50s whose tailored suit and calculated smile marked him as the type of attorney who specialized in aggressive negotiation. Brandon waited outside in the parking lot, a detail that struck me as oddly telling. He wanted the benefits of Melissa's potential windfall, but preferred to keep his hands clean of the actual transaction. Lauren, Emma, Melissa nodded curtly as she took her seat. All pretense of familial warmth abandoned now that we'd moved to the business phase of our relationship. This is Gregory Walsh, my attorney. After brief introductions, Patricia opened her primary folder. We've reviewed your client's proposal for voluntary termination of parental rights in conjunction with her relocation plans. My clients are prepared to accept the financial terms, with certain conditions. Walsh raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by our lack of resistance to the amount. What conditions? Patricia slid a document across the table. The full agreement is outlined here, but essentially, the $250,000 would be placed in escrow, with 15% released upon signing the preliminary agreement, and the remainder disbursed after court approval of termination and verification of Ms. Reynolds' relocation to Arizona. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly. That could take months. Approximately 60 days, Patricia corrected. We've researched the typical timeline for uncontested termination cases in this jurisdiction. The court prioritizes resolution when all parties are in agreement. Walsh reviewed the document with practiced efficiency. There's also a non-disclosure provision here. Standard in family settlements, Patricia replied evenly. It prohibits all parties from discussing the financial terms of the agreement publicly or with the minor child. That seems reasonable, Walsh acknowledged, still scanning the document. However, the relocation verification is problematic. My client's timeline is contingent on her partner's employment opportunity, which may be flexible. I recognize the negotiating tactic immediately, creating an artificial obstacle to concede later in exchange for a more significant concession from us. Patricia evidently recognized it too, as she didn't immediately respond. The relocation component is non-negotiable, Emma stated firmly, speaking for the first time. The court will require a compelling reason for termination beyond financial consideration. Ms. Reynolds' decision to pursue opportunities incompatible with Ethan's established life here provides that justification. Melissa's confident facade cracked slightly. Are you suggesting I need to actually move to Phoenix for this to work? That is precisely what we're saying, I confirmed, meeting her gaze directly. The narrative presented to the court must be truthful and verifiable. You are choosing to relocate for professional and personal opportunities, recognizing that uprooting Ethan would be detrimental to his well-being. A flash of calculation crossed her face as she exchanged glances with Walsh. And if our plans change after the termination is finalized? The agreement includes a 2-year non-residence clause for the metropolitan area, Patricia pointed out, indicating the relevant section. After that, you're free to live wherever you choose, but the initial relocation must be genuine and documented. Walsh leaned close to Melissa, whispering something that caused her to frown momentarily before her expression smoothed back into practiced neutrality. The escrow arrangement is acceptable, Walsh said after their brief consultation. However, we propose 25% released upon signing rather than 15%. And will need specific parameters defining what constitutes verification of relocation. The negotiation continued for nearly 2 hours, addressing every detail from the timeline for court filings to the specific language that would be presented to the judge. Throughout the discussion, I noticed Melissa's attention repeatedly drifting to the parking lot where Brandon waited, as if seeking invisible guidance or reassurance. Finally, Walsh closed his portfolio. I believe we've addressed all substantive points. I'll revise the agreement according to our discussion and circulate it for review by tomorrow afternoon. As we prepared to leave, Melissa suddenly asked, "What about Ethan's things? His clothes, his electronics?" The question, the first that centered on Ethan himself rather than financial or legal considerations, caught me off guard. For a moment, I glimpsed something almost like genuine concern in her expression. "We can arrange for you to pack his belongings while he's at school," I offered, "or we can pack them for you, whatever you prefer." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do it. There are a few things I want to make sure he keeps. Things from David." The unexpected mention of my son sent a pang through my chest. I sometimes forgot that despite everything, Melissa had once loved David, had built a life with him, had given birth to their child. What had transformed that young woman into the person sitting across from me now, clinically negotiating away her relationship with their son? "I'll let you know when Ethan will be out of the house for several hours," I said quietly. "You can have that time privately." Something flashed across her face, gratitude, regret, before her composed mask returned. "Thank you." As we walked to our cars, Emma voiced the question that had been circling in my mind. "Do you think she'll actually go through with it once the reality sets in?" Patricia considered this thoughtfully. The financial motivation is strong, and she's clearly invested in her new relationship, but terminating parental rights is profoundly final. Some clients experience last-minute hesitation when faced with signing the actual documents. "She won't hesitate," I said with quiet certainty. "Not if the money is sufficient, and her path forward with Brandon remains clear." "How can you be so sure?" Emma asked. I thought about the woman I'd observed over the 8 months since David's death, her calculated decisions, her shifting priorities, her fundamental self-interest. Because Melissa has already emotionally terminated her relationship with Ethan. The legal formality is just catching up to the reality she's already created. As I unlocked my car, I caught sight of Brandon watching us from across the parking lot, his expression a mixture of impatience and avarice. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that our negotiation wasn't really with Melissa at all. She was merely the conduit for his ambitions, a realization that both strengthened my resolve and deepened my sadness for the family David had once believed in. "Let's go home," I said to Emma. "Ethan will be wondering how the meeting went." What I wouldn't tell him, not yet, was how his mother had put a price tag on their relationship and how readily we had agreed to pay it. "But why does Mom need to pack my stuff?" Ethan asked, confusion clouding his face as I explained the arrangements for the following day. "I'm staying here, right?" We sat at the kitchen table, afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that had been replaced after the brick incident. 3 weeks had passed since our negotiation meeting. The revised agreement had been signed, the initial payment transferred to escrow, and preliminary court paperwork filed. Tomorrow, Melissa would come to collect Ethan's belongings from the family home while he spent the day with Emma at the Science Museum. "Yes, you're staying here," I assured him. "But since your mom is moving to Phoenix, she needs to sort through your things at her house and decide what should come here permanently." It wasn't the complete truth, but it was age-appropriate, the approach Dr. Shaw had recommended as we prepared Ethan for the changes ahead. We hadn't yet explained the concept of termination of parental rights, instead focusing on the more immediate reality of Melissa's relocation. Ethan frowned, processing this information with the careful deliberation that reminded me so much of David. "Does she have to move? Couldn't she stay here and we could figure out, normal custody stuff?" The question revealed what I had suspected. Beneath Ethan's apparent acceptance of the situation, part of him still hoped for reconciliation with his mother. Despite her neglect, despite the recorded evidence of her priorities, she remained his mother. That primal bond couldn't be severed by logic alone. "Your mom has made her decision," I said gently. "She believes this move represents an important opportunity for her future with Brandon." "More important than me," Ethan said flatly, the hurt barely concealed beneath his matter-of-fact tone. I resisted the urge to agree or to disparage Melissa. Dr. Shaw had emphasized the importance of allowing Ethan to form his own conclusions without adult influence. "I can't speak to your mom's priorities, Ethan. I can only tell you that Emma and I are committed to providing you with stability and support, no matter what." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Can I at least call her tomorrow, to say goodbye before she packs everything up?" The request caught me off guard. Since the custody hearing, Ethan had shown little interest in communicating with Melissa, especially after discovering her social media campaign against me. The supervised calls mandated by the temporary custody order had been brief and awkward. "Of course," I agreed, reaching for my phone. "Would you like to call her now?" He shook his head. "No, tomorrow is better. Before she starts packing, I just want to tell her something." The cryptic response triggered a flutter of concern, but I respected his privacy. Ethan had demonstrated remarkable maturity throughout this ordeal. He deserved some agency in managing his relationship with his mother, even as it approached its legal conclusion. Later that evening, as Emma and I prepared dinner, I shared Ethan's request. "Do you think we should be worried about what he wants to tell her?" Emma considered this as she chopped vegetables with surgical precision. "He's not confrontational by nature. My guess is he wants closure, perhaps to ask questions he's been hesitant to voice in our presence, or to make one last attempt to change her mind," I suggested, the possibility sending a chill through me despite the kitchen's warmth. "Even if that's his intention, would it be wrong to allow it?" Emma challenged gently. "If Melissa chose Ethan over Phoenix and Brandon, wouldn't that ultimately be better for him? A mother who actually prioritizes her child?" The question gave me pause. Had I become so focused on winning this battle that I'd lost sight of what might truly be best for Ethan? If Melissa had a last-minute change of heart, rejected the money, and committed to genuine co-parenting, wouldn't that represent healing rather than defeat? "You're right," I acknowledged. "If she chose Ethan, I would adjust." The words felt inadequate to describe the complex recalibration such a development would require, but they were honest. "She won't," Emma said quietly, her certainty matching my own earlier assessment. "But Ethan needs to know he was given every opportunity to maintain that relationship. Otherwise, he might spend years wondering if he could have prevented the rupture." Dr. Shaw confirmed this perspective during our phone consultation that evening after Ethan had gone to bed. "Allowing Ethan some agency in this transition is crucial for his long-term adjustment," she explained. "Even if the conversation is painful, it's better than the alternative of feeling powerless in a situation that fundamentally alters his life." The following morning brought unseasonable rain, matching the somber mood as Ethan prepared for his day with Emma. He seemed withdrawn, responding to questions with monosyllables and picking at his breakfast without enthusiasm. You can call your mom from the car before we reach the museum, Emma offered, as they prepared to leave. I'll give you privacy. Ethan nodded, clutching his phone with unusual intensity. As they headed toward the door, he suddenly turned back and hugged me fiercely, a spontaneous gesture that caught me by surprise. Love you, Grandma, he whispered, before pulling away, eyes suspiciously bright. Love you too, I replied, throat tight with emotion. Have fun at the museum. After they departed, I busied myself with practical tasks, laundry, meal preparation for the week ahead, organizing the guest room that would soon become Ethan's permanent space. Anything to distract from the knowledge that across town, Melissa was systematically removing herself from her son's life. Patricia called mid-morning with an update. Melissa's attorney has confirmed she'll be at the house from noon until 3. The court date for the termination hearing has been set for 3 weeks from today. Assuming all goes as planned, this should be finalized before the new school year begins. Has she mentioned any hesitation? I asked, still processing my conversation with Emma the previous evening. None, Patricia replied firmly. In fact, she's requested information about expediting the process if possible. She's eager to complete the relocation. The confirmation simultaneously relieved and saddened me. Relieved because it suggested our path to stability for Ethan remained clear. Saddened because no mother should be eager to sever ties with her child, regardless of circumstances. Shortly after noon, Emma texted, "Call with M complete. Brief but intense. E upset but processing. Continuing with museum plans. Home around 4. I resisted the urge to ask for details, knowing Emma would share what was appropriate when they returned. Instead, I focused on preparing Ethan's favorite lasagna for dinner, a small comfort after what was clearly a difficult emotional experience. At precisely 3 o'clock, my phone rang with Melissa's number. I answered cautiously, uncertain what to expect after Ethan's conversation with her. "I've finished at the house," she said without preamble, her voice strangely subdued. "Everything's sorted and labeled. Ethan's clothes are packed in suitcases in his room. The things he specifically asked for are in boxes marked with his name." "Thank you," I replied, matching her businesslike tone. "Is there anything else you need before the court date?" A pause, lengthy enough that I checked to ensure the call hadn't disconnected. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked me why the money was more important than he was. The simple, devastating question hung between us, unanswerable in its brutal clarity. "What did you tell him?" I finally asked, when it became clear Melissa wouldn't continue without prompting. "The truth," she said, her voice steadying, "that I'm not cut out to be a mother, that I never wanted that role but tried because David did, that he deserves better than what I can give him." The raw honesty surprised me, contrasting sharply with the calculated manipulation she'd demonstrated throughout our legal battle. "That must have been a difficult conversation," I offered neutrally. "He said he forgives me," Melissa continued, disregarding my comment. "Can you imagine? After everything, he said he forgives me and hopes I'll be happy in Phoenix." For the first time since David's death, I heard genuine emotion in her voice, not the performative display she'd cultivated for court appearances, but authentic pain and perhaps a flicker of the person she might have been under different circumstances. "Ethan has his father's capacity for compassion," I said quietly. "Yes," she agreed, the single word laden with recognition of all she was relinquishing. "Take care of him, Lauren." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the ingredients for Ethan's favorite meal, contemplating the unexpected glimpse of humanity from a woman I had come to view as little more than an adversary. When Emma and Ethan returned that afternoon, I knew immediately from their expressions that something significant had shifted. Ethan's eyes were reddened but clear, his posture straighter than it had been in months, as if a weight had been lifted from his young shoulders. "I told Mom it was okay for her to go," he announced without preamble, "that she doesn't have to pretend anymore, that we'll both be better off this way." The simple declaration, delivered with quiet dignity, marked the beginning of our healing, not as victors in a custody battle, but as a family rebuilding from shared loss. The family court looked different in late summer light, less intimidating than it had appeared during our initial custody hearing 3 months earlier. Perhaps it was the change in circumstances, or perhaps it was Ethan's calm demeanor as we walked up the granite steps together, but the building seemed to have transformed from an arena of conflict to a place of resolution. "Remember," Patricia reminded us as we gathered outside courtroom C, This proceeding is primarily procedural. Judge Carlton has reviewed all documentation and conducted private interviews with both Ethan and Melissa. Unless he identifies significant concerns, today should be straightforward. Ethan nodded, solemn in his navy blazer and khaki pants, the same outfit he'd worn to the first hearing, now slightly too small after a summer growth spurt. At 12, verging on 13, he stood at the threshold between childhood and adolescence, forced to navigate adult complexities while still collecting Pokemon cards and building elaborate Lego structures. Emma adjusted his slightly crooked tie. "You don't have to say anything unless the judge directly asks you a question," she assured him. "And if you feel uncomfortable at any point, just look at us. We can request a break." "I'm okay," Ethan replied with the quiet confidence he'd been gradually reclaiming since his conversation with Melissa. The past 3 weeks had brought noticeable changes: improved sleep, increased appetite, renewed interest in activities he'd abandoned during the custody battle. Dr. Shaw described it as the natural resilience of childhood asserting itself once the primary source of stress is addressed. As we entered the courtroom, I spotted Melissa and Brandon already seated on the opposite side. She wore a conservative gray dress that conveyed appropriate seriousness for the occasion, while Brandon's expression betrayed barely concealed impatience. A man eager to complete a transaction and move forward. Judge Carlton entered promptly at 9, his manner businesslike, but not cold. After preliminary statements from both attorneys outlining the voluntary termination agreement, he addressed Melissa directly. "Ms. Reynolds, I've reviewed your petition for voluntary termination of parental rights, along with the supporting documentation and our private discussion. Before proceeding, I must confirm for the record, do you fully understand that termination of parental rights is permanent and irreversible?" Melissa stood, hands clasped before her. "Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that upon termination, you will have no legal right to visitation, communication, or input regarding any aspect of your son's life?" "I understand," she confirmed, her voice steady. Judge Carlton studied her carefully. "In most cases of voluntary termination, the court requires extraordinary circumstances or a step-parent adoption. Neither applies here. Why should I approve this petition?" Patricia had prepared us for this question, the central issue any family court judge would need to address. "Your Honor," Melissa began, following the narrative we had carefully constructed during negotiations, "my relocation to Phoenix represents a significant opportunity for professional advancement and personal growth. Attempting to maintain a cross-country co-parenting relationship would create instability for Ethan, particularly given our challenging history. He has a stable, loving home with his grandmother and aunt, continuity in his school and community, and ongoing therapeutic support processing his father's death." She paused, then added something that hadn't been rehearsed. "Most importantly, Ethan deserves parents who can fully commit to his well-being. Lauren and Emma Carter have demonstrated that commitment consistently. I have not." The simple admission, honest in a way I hadn't expected, seemed to register with Judge Carlton, whose expression softened slightly. "Mr. Walsh," the judge addressed Melissa's attorney, "the court notes a financial settlement associated with this termination. Would you characterize this as payment for parental rights?" Walsh responded smoothly. "Not at all, Your Honor. The settlement addresses practical matters related to Ms. Reynolds' relocation and recognizes the significant financial responsibility the Carters are assuming. It's structured to facilitate a clean transition for all parties." Judge Carlton's slight frown suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by this characterization, but he moved on. "Ethan Reynolds," he said, his tone gentling as he addressed my grandson directly. "We spoke privately last week, but I want to confirm your position has not changed. Do you understand what's happening today?" Ethan stood, his voice remarkably steady. "Yes, sir. My mom is legally ending her role as my parent so she can move to Arizona. My grandmother will have full custody of me." "And you're comfortable with this arrangement?" Ethan nodded, then added with unexpected eloquence, "My dad used to say that family is about showing up, not just sharing DNA. My grandma and Aunt Emma have shown up for me every day. I'll be okay with them." A murmur rippled through the courtroom at the simple wisdom from a 12-year-old's perspective. I blinked back tears, recognizing David's oft-repeated philosophy in his son's words. Judge Carlton nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Ethan. You may be seated." After consulting several documents before him, the judge removed his glasses and addressed the courtroom. Having reviewed all relevant factors, including the guardian ad litem's recommendation, psychological evaluations, and my interviews with the parties, I find that the proposed termination serves the child's best interests under these specific circumstances. He turned to Melissa. Ms. Reynolds, are you making this decision freely and voluntarily, without coercion? Yes, Your Honor, she confirmed. And to the Carters, are you prepared to assume full legal responsibility for Ethan's care and well-being? We are, Emma and I responded in unison. Judge Carlton nodded once, decisively. Then, by the authority vested in me by the state, I hereby terminate the parental rights of Melissa Reynolds with respect to minor child Ethan David Reynolds, transferring full legal guardianship to Lauren Carter, with Emma Carter designated as successor guardian. The gavel struck with surprising gentleness, belying the monumental nature of what had just occurred. In that moment, the legal structure of our family was fundamentally altered, not creating something entirely new, but formalizing the reality that had been developing since David's death. As we gathered our belongings, Melissa approached hesitantly, maintaining a respectful distance from Ethan. The apartment lease in Phoenix starts next week, she said, addressing me rather than him. We'll be leaving on Tuesday. I wish you well, I replied with genuine sincerity, the bitterness of our conflict having gradually dissolved into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of the human complexity beneath our adversarial positions. Melissa nodded, then turned to Ethan, uncertainty evident in her posture. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward and offered his hand with remarkable maturity. Goodbye, Mom, he said simply. I hope you find what you're looking for. Something flickered across Melissa's face, regret, relief, a complicated mixture of both, before she briefly clasped his hand. Take care of yourself, Ethan. You're going to be an amazing person. She turned quickly after that, rejoining Brandon, who had remained strategically distant during the exchange. They departed without looking back, their silhouettes framed briefly in the courtroom doorway before disappearing. Melissa walking out of Ethan's life with the same decisive finality with which the judge's gavel had fallen. Outside on the courthouse steps, Ethan stood between Emma and me, blinking in the bright August sunshine. Is it really over? He asked, his voice suddenly younger, more vulnerable than it had been inside. The legal part is, Emma confirmed, her arm around his shoulders. The rest, processing everything, building our new normal, that's ongoing, but we'll do it together. As we walked to the car, Ethan fell into step beside me. Dad would be okay with this, wouldn't he? He asked quietly. He wouldn't think I gave up on Mom too easily? The question pierced my heart, the child still seeking reassurance that he hadn't failed some invisible test of family loyalty. Your father, I said carefully, wanted one thing above all else, for you to be safe, loved, and happy. He would be incredibly proud of how you've handled this impossible situation with grace and compassion beyond your years. Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assessment. Can we stop for ice cream on the way home? To celebrate? The simple request, so normal, so blessedly ordinary, felt like the first genuine step into our future. Absolutely, I agreed. Today calls for a double scoop. As we drove away from the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of Ethan in the rearview mirror, his face turned toward the window, expression pensive but not despairing. We had navigated the most treacherous waters of our journey, not without damage, but without drowning. What remained was the careful, patient work of reconstruction. And for the first time since David's death, I allowed myself to believe we would not merely survive this ordeal, but eventually thrive beyond it. 1 year after the termination hearing, I stood in the doorway of what was now indisputably Ethan's room, watching as he carefully arranged his science fair display on his desk. The project, an impressively sophisticated analysis of water quality in local streams, had already won first place at his middle school. Tomorrow, it would compete at the regional level. Do you think the graphs are clear enough? He asked, adjusting the poster board slightly. At 13, Ethan had grown 4 inches in 12 months, his voice occasionally cracking as it transitioned toward adulthood. The gangly uncertainty of early adolescence was tempered by a quiet confidence that had gradually emerged as our lives stabilized. They're perfect, I assured him, suppressing a smile at his perfectionism. another trait inherited from his father. The color coding makes the data patterns immediately obvious. He nodded, satisfied with this assessment from a former English teacher. Dad would have loved this project, wouldn't he? He would have been absolutely fascinated, I confirmed. Probably would have suggested 3 more experiments before you'd even finished this one. Ethan laughed, the sound unburdened in a way that still occasionally surprised me. Aunt Emma said the same thing when I showed her the preliminary results. She wanted me to expand it to include watershed analysis. The easy mention of both his father and aunt reflected the healing that had gradually occurred over the past year. Emma had accepted a permanent position at Seattle Children's Hospital, but maintained her presence in Ethan's life through monthly visits and weekly video calls. Her professional success, recently published research on pediatric transplant outcomes, would have made David immensely proud. Dinner in 20 minutes, I reminded Ethan. Diane and Dr. Shaw are joining us, remember? I remember, he confirmed, already turning back to make final adjustments to his display. In the kitchen, I put the finishing touches on a celebratory meal, lasagna, still Ethan's favorite, garlic bread, and a salad featuring vegetables from the garden we had started together last spring. Cooking had become a shared activity, one of many new traditions we had established in our reconfigured family. The doorbell rang just as I was setting the table. Diane arrived first, bearing her famous tiramisu for dessert, followed shortly by Dr. Shaw. Over the past year, the therapist had transitioned from professional support to family friend, her warm wisdom proving valuable well beyond the initial crisis that had brought her into our lives. As we settled around the table, the conversation flowed easily. Ethan enthusiastically explaining his scientific methodology, Diane sharing amusing stories from her recent Mediterranean cruise, Dr. Shaw discussing the children's art therapy program she had established at the community center. "I've been meaning to tell you," Dr. Shaw said during a natural pause in conversation. "Ethan's case study, anonymized of course, has been accepted for presentation at a national conference on childhood resilience. His journey provides valuable insights for professionals working with children navigating family restructuring." Ethan looked up with interest. "You're using my story to help other kids?" "With your grandmother's permission," Dr. Shaw confirmed. "Your experience, particularly how you processed the termination, offers important lessons about children's capacity to adapt when provided with appropriate support and honesty." I watched Ethan absorb this information, noting the subtle straightening of his shoulders, the physical manifestation of recognizing that his pain might serve a purpose beyond mere suffering. "Speaking of which," he said after a moment, setting down his fork, "there's something I've been wanting to show everyone." He disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with his tablet. "I found this while organizing old files last week. It's the original recording from the court hearing." The mention of that pivotal moment, Ethan raising his phone in the courtroom, the devastating evidence of Melissa's true priorities playing for all to hear, sent a ripple of tension through our celebratory dinner. "Are you sure you want to revisit that, sweetheart?" I asked carefully. We had rarely discussed Melissa since her departure for Phoenix. True to the non-disclosure agreement, she had maintained complete silence, no birthday cards, no holiday greetings, no social media mentions of the son she had legally relinquished. "I'm sure," Ethan replied, with the quiet determination that had become his hallmark. "I think it's important." He placed the tablet on the table and pressed play. The recording began with Melissa's voice, sharp, impatient, dismissive of Ethan's desire to visit me. But then, something unexpected happened. As the familiar argument continued, I realized with growing confusion that this wasn't the same recording that had been played in court. This version continued beyond the argument about visiting me, capturing a conversation I had never heard before. "Mom," Ethan's voice asked, "do you even want me to live with you?" A lengthy pause followed, then Melissa's sigh. "It's complicated, Ethan." "That's not an answer." Another pause. "If I'm being honest, I was never meant to be a mother. Your father wanted children. I went along with it because I loved him. But this role, it doesn't come naturally to me the way it does to your grandmother. Then why are you fighting for custody?" Ethan's voice was smaller now, vulnerable. "Because that's what mothers are supposed to do," Melissa replied, an edge of bitterness in her tone. "Because admitting I don't want that responsibility makes me a monster in everyone's eyes, not in mine," Ethan said quietly. "I'd rather know the truth than live with someone who resents me." The recording ended there, leaving a stunned silence around our dinner table. I stared at Ethan, struggling to process what I'd just heard. "That's not the recording from court," I finally managed. "No," he confirmed, meeting my gaze steadily. "That one came later, after I realized what was really happening with Mom and Brandon and the trust fund. This was the first one, from about 2 weeks earlier." Dr. Shaw leaned forward slightly. "You recorded this conversation and then chose not to use it?" Ethan nodded. "At first, I thought if Mom admitted she didn't really want to be a parent, that would solve everything. But then I overheard her and Brandon talking about the trust fund, and I realized—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I realized that showing a judge she didn't want me would hurt her too much. It would make her look like a bad person. The money conversation was better because it was about them being greedy, not about her failing as a mother. The profound compassion of this decision, a 12-year-old boy protecting the dignity of the very woman who had failed to protect him, left me speechless. Even in the midst of his own pain, Ethan had considered how to minimize damage to Melissa's reputation. That was an incredibly empathetic choice," Dr. Shaw observed gently. "May I ask why you're sharing it now?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "Because I'm not angry anymore. For a long time, I thought Mom gave me up because she wanted money more than she wanted me. That hurt a lot. But now I understand she gave me up because she knew Grandma and Aunt Emma could give me what she couldn't. The money was just making it easier to admit the truth." The insight, profound in its compassion and maturity, brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I glimpsed the man Ethan was becoming, thoughtful, perceptive, capable of understanding human complexity beyond his years. "Your father would be so proud of the person you're becoming," I said softly. Ethan smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I know. That's why I wanted to share this tonight. I feel like I'm finally okay with everything that happened. Like I can stop wondering if things could have been different." Diane, who had remained respectfully silent during this revelation, reached over to squeeze Ethan's hand. "That's what healing looks like, young man. Not forgetting or pretending it didn't hurt, but finding a way to carry the experience without being defined by it." As we resumed our meal, the conversation gradually returning to lighter topics, I observed the people gathered around my table. This chosen family we had constructed from the fragments of tragedy. Diane, whose steadfast friendship had sustained me through the darkest days. Dr. Shaw, whose professional guidance had transformed into genuine connection. And most importantly, Ethan, the grandson who had become in many ways the heart of my life's second act. The journey from that first courthouse hearing had been neither straight nor easy. There had been setbacks amid the progress. Nights when Ethan still cried for his father. Moments when the absence of his mother still stung despite her limitations. Days when I questioned whether I had enough strength and wisdom to guide him through adolescence. But watching him now, animated as he explained a technical aspect of his project to Diane, confidence gradually replacing the uncertainty that had shadowed him after David's death, I felt profound gratitude for the path we had traveled together. The recording that had changed everything in that courtroom had been powerful in its damning evidence. But this second recording, the one Ethan had compassionately withheld, revealed something far more significant. Not just the failure of one mother, but the extraordinary capacity for understanding in her son. Later that night, after our guests had departed and Ethan had gone to bed, I sat on the porch swing Robert had built decades earlier, contemplating the journey that had brought us to this moment of quiet resolution. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How did the dinner go? Is he ready for tomorrow?" "More than ready," I replied, and he shared something remarkable about the original recording. "I'll tell you everything during our call tomorrow. Can't wait to hear. Give him a hug from me in the morning. Love you both." I tucked the phone away, gazing at the stars visible above the trees Robert and I had planted when we first purchased this property. So much had changed, yet something essential remained constant. The love that had built this home continued to sustain it, flowing through generations in different forms, but never diminishing. In the quiet darkness, I whispered a truth that had gradually emerged from the chaos of the past 18 months. We're going to be okay. And for the first time, I believed it completely.
Did you enjoy my story? What a journey it has been. I truly wonder, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace, or would you have done what I did to reclaim your dignity? Let's meet in the comments below. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. I'm reading every single one. Which city are you listening from tonight? If my story resonated with you, you can support me and help me bring more stories like this to the world by sending a super thanks. Your sweet support means the world to me and allows me to continue this journey with all of you. On the screen now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you watch next. There are so many more on my channel, each with its own lessons and triumphs. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here with me. Until the next story, with love and respect.